Shipping's low greenhouse gas fuel gap is emerging as a key decarbonization challenge. DNV forecasts 50 million tons of consumption capacity by 2030, but supply may not keep pace. Here to discuss this are Torben Norgard from Maersk McKinney Moller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping and Chris Chatterton from Maritime Ethanol and Methanol Alliance. Welcome, Torben and Chris. So, how serious is the gap between projected demand for low GHG fuels and the current supply levels?
And if we look at the demand side, then the fleet transition is very well underway. We see dual fuel capabilities and technology being adopted on the fleet as we speak, with a very, very high frequency and a high percentage of the new build. We see dual fuel vessels on the liquid pathways being mobilized with dual fuel methanol vessels enabled. We see also a gaseous pathway with dual fuel methane capabilities being adopted. On the supply side, we also see a lot of activity, but the maritime industry needs to recognize that it's part of an energy transition that happens across industries with new energy systems developing. One example of is the ethanol pathway, which can play a role on the liquid pathway because it can be a substitute for methanol and act as an interim fuel while methanol is still being scaled. So the opportunity here is to ensure that optionality in the fleet is brought to life into the energy transition.
It's widening as we speak. If you look at the new order book, we have hundreds literally of dual fuel vessels coming online. And across mainly LNG and methanol with ammonia to enter soon. But the actual availability of these compliant low GHG fuels is really nowhere near keeping pace with the vessels that are entering service. The issue is not just production capacity, it's usable, certified, and economically viable supply. So a large portion of announced volumes are either haven't yet reached FID, nor they won't meet the carbon intensity thresholds required under Fuel EU. The ships are being delivered, fuel ready, but operating mostly on conventional fuels, unless we significantly broaden the fuel pool, particularly with these scalable options like ethanol and other biofuels. So the gap is going to persist longer than expected now.
But out of everything, what would you say are the biggest barriers preventing fuel supply from scaling?
What we see is that investments in energy systems continue to increase year on year. The driver behind those investments have, however, changed. We see that the climate agenda is being something that has a lower, less prominent place on what drives investments, and it has been replaced by energy resilience. As a consequence, we see much more investment flowing into green electricity, electricity storage, and bio-based fuels, all characterized by something that serves near markets, regional markets. The shipping needs to navigate that and adapt to that, because investments in energy systems and energy transition is very much driven by policies. We from the Center for Zero Carbon Shipping work intensively with vessel owners on how they can adapt to this, develop robust strategies that will allow them to do investment planning on how they plug into these energy systems.
Well, I would have to say first, policy misalignment and the rigidity of the policy that's being proposed. Today's policy frameworks often pick winners instead of enabling outcomes. So this is creating bottlenecks, the IMO level, because fuels that are available, like ethanol or certain biofuels, are not recognized or incentivized, more importantly, at scale. Second, the economics and the financing risks. So projects for production depend heavily on long-term offtake agreements, carbon pricing visibility, and regulatory certainty. But in the absence of those, capital stays on the sidelines. And third, the infrastructure and logistics constraints are very real. Even where the fuel exists, getting it to the right port, in the right specification with proper certification and traceability to validate it is non-trivial.
So considering everything that you both just mentioned, I believe this cannot be addressed in a snap. So with that, let's say in the next 5 years, what must happen to ensure the shipping industry stays on track for its decarbonization targets?
The learning journey that the maritime industry is on, where it builds new capabilities to be able to operate in this new environment. It's about upgrading ship owner capability inside safe operations with these new energy carriers. And it's about upgrading its trading and origination capabilities. And maybe most importantly, they also need to upgrade on strategic planning, because we see more long-term cycles in terms of the energy and getting access to this energy. Secondly, the maritime industry needs to continue to develop and implement regulation that allows the maritime industry to stay relevant to these energy systems and to compete in these energy systems. We see a liquid pathway maturing. We see a gaseous pathway starting on fossil-based methane, LNG, and ending up with green ammonia as a low-emission solution. And lastly, we see electricity now as a real solution for vessels to operate on for nearshore activities, but also for regional activity. To sum it all up, capability needs to be built inside the system, and regulation needs to be built to ensure relevance and maritime's ability to compete in the new markets.
We need to move from ambition and as you suggest, target setting to real execution and more pragmatic operation. So first and foremost, policy needs to become really fuel agnostic and performance based. We should be rewarding carbon intensity reductions, not specific pathways. This will immediately unlock a wider pool of fuels, again, to include ethanol with biomethanol and other blended solutions. So second, we need to scale these transitional fuels. So not really wait for the perfect solution. We need drop-in and near drop-in fuels and options that can deliver more immediate emissions reductions now. Third, we need to rapidly expand the bunkering infrastructure using existing hubs. And fourth, I would say the transparency over data and the certification systems themselves must mature quickly. And then finally, more collaboration across both producers, the OEMs, class ports, regulators. If we can get all these elements right, then we can stay on track. If not, then the risk is not just creating a system where vessels are built for fuels that simply aren't there.
These are all very helpful points. Thank you so much for joining us today, Torben and Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. It was great to be with you, Cess, and also with Chris.
Once again, those were Torben Norgard, Chief Technology and Analytics Officer at Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, and Chris Chatterton, Maritime Advisor and Global Center for Green Fuels at Maritime Ethanol and Methanol Alliance. For more news, visit marinereport.com.